The Dresden Codex.
The Dresden Codex is one of 4 surviving books produced by the Mayan while still unconquered by the Spanish. While many other codices from pre-Columbian Mesoamerica exist, only Dresden, Paris, Madrid, and Grolier Codices were written by the Maya. Exactly where the Dresden was written remains unknown. Iconographic and ethnographic evidence strongly suggests that it was produced in the Yucatan, possibly in the Chichen Itza, Mayapan area. The date of the book's composition is to this day a subject of debate between scholars. Through careful analysis of base dates within the Dresden, Bricker and Bricker have presented evidence narrowing the range to the 13th or 14th centuries. The Brickers were adamant that although the Dresden appears to be a book that was copied and recopied, pasted on for generations and expanded cumulatively over centuries of time, the content of its pages must be considerably older. In terms of its physical appearance, the Dresden Codex is 3.5 meters long, fan-folded into 39.9 cm wide pages, 20.4 centimeters high and painted on both sides. The paper itself is made from the fibers of a species of ficus tree, called adamant in Yucatan, and coated with a fine layer of lime plaster. While the texts and numbers are painted in thin line red and black, the associated images are illustrated in beautiful polychromatic detail. Zimmermann suggested that the Dresden is the work of no less than 8 distinct scribes. The content of the Dresden Codex was divided into 3 primary topics: 260-day almanacs, and 364-day counts of worship and divination, astronomical and astrological material, providing prophecies for the ton, that is 360 days, and the ton, that is 20 tons or 7,200 days. The almanacs and day counts, which occupy the bulk of the codex, concern topics of daily life. They deal with subjects like agriculture, weather, disease and medicine, occupations, marriage, commerce, childbirth, and worship schedules. Celestial cycles known to have been recorded in the Dresden include the synodic periods of Venus, Mars, and Mercury, zeniths and equinoxes of the Sun, and eclipse cycles of both the Moon and the Sunday. From the time of its departure from the Yucatan, sometime shortly after the conquest, the Dresden Codex disappeared for 200 years. It re-emerged in 1739, when it was purchased from a private owner in Vienna. Its name was Johann Christian Gotz. He was none other than the director of the Royal Library of Dresden. Almost 100 years later, Lord Kingsborough published the first accurate facsimile of the Codex in Volume 3 of his Antiquities of Mexico series, done between 1831 and 1848. Through his work many scholars had for the first time access to copies of the rare document. Nevertheless, decades passed before the Dresden's mysteries were for the first time thoroughly studied. We now jump to 1880, to a scholar named Ernst Fissmann, who published the first investigation of the book's subjects. It was written to complement his new facsimile, a flawless color reproduction of the Dresden, produced by the use of a new technique of chromolithography. His work was to mark the beginning of a 30-year string of steady publications on the Dresden. Later on, in 1892, he corrected the pagination order of the book, restoring it to its intended form. His original 1880 chromolithography, as well as the Kingsborough edition, were reassembled incorrectly. The Codex arrived in Dresden separated into 3 pieces. 143 years later, Ernst Fissmann understood it well enough to finally put it back together correctly. He then went on to produce the first complete commentary on the Dresden in 1901 and then revised it in 1906. With momentum generated from Fissmann's brilliant pioneering efforts, Other scholars were to join the quest to decipher the meaning of the mysterious manuscript. Sal has in 1904 produced a study about the deities of the Dresden, that is still in use today. Tozer in 1910 investigated the significance of the animals portrayed in its pages. Others, like Bowditch in 1910, Gove in 1921, and Wilson in 1924, gave special attention to the understanding of the calendrical and astronomical information. Much of what these early scholars concluded is still accepted today. As we reach the 1930s, we see two new facsimiles being produced. This time by Gates in 1932, and the brothers Villacata in 1933. This provided and inspired many new studies on various aspects of the Dresden. The eclipse tables were studied in detail by Spinden in 1930. The permutations of the serpent numbers were explained by Baer in 1933. In 1955, Yuri Nrazov used the hieroglyphs of the Dresden Codex as the source for examples, through which to prove his landmark hypothesis on the nature of decipherment. In a paper entitled Ancient Writing of Central America, Nrazov demonstrated that the animals portrayed in the Dresden were named in hieroglyphs that phonetically spelled out their names as if spoken in modern Yucatec Maya. This was against contemporary opinions that perceived all Maya hieroglyphs as logographic, having nothing to do with spoken language. Unfortunately, Nrazov's research, as many other things, was swept under the rug of the Cold War, costing it to reappear 20 years later. The 1950s also produced the second great study of Yucatec gods as understood through the Dresden, this time by Zimmermann in 1956. It was the study of the Dresden and the other Maya codices that allowed the letter designation system, still used to identify Maya deities. In 1972, the preeminent Maya scholar J. Eric Thompson produced the single most comprehensive commentary on the Dresden Codex available today. Towards the end of a prolific career as the student of Maya culture, Thompson focused his attention on the Dresden. Though his dogmatic stance on the nature of Maya hieroglyphs has since made the majority of his translations obsolete, Thompson's use of ethnography to explain the images and cycles are still the most holistic ever produced. Starting in the late 70s, in conjunction with the growing acceptance of phonetic decipherments, yet more of the Dresden became understandable. In addition, the growing field of archaeoastronomy was shedding new light on the functions of the astronomical tables. Over the last decade and a half, Victoria Bricker, Michael Kloss and Floyd Lounsbury, among others, have used a combination of glyphic translations, calendrical studies, and astronomy to make major contributions towards our knowledge of what phenomena are recorded and for what purposes. In the 1990s, research continues to reveal new information on the Dresden. Carl Taub, in his book, The Major Gods of Ancient Yucatan from 1992, presented new ideas for the identities of deities portrayed in the Dresden. Anthony Evany, one of the forefathers of Mesoamerican archaeoastronomy, edited a 1992 collection of articles entitled The Sky in Mayan Literature. Included in that collection, Victoria and Harvey Bricker provide a new method through which to cross-date almanacs and tables within the Dresden. As can be seen from the brief summary above, the Dresden has been intensively studied for over 100 years. Deciphering all its hidden messages, if manageable, may take many 100 more.
The end.